Welcome to the TechnoGals podcast, a podcast where we talk about technology and anything else that is top of mind. Let's get started.
I was like, I saw that. I watched one of them. I saw it.
So today on TechnoGals, we have Shayla King with us to talk about the power of saying no and executive presence. Shayla, do you want to just do a brief introduction of yourself before we kind of jump into these topics?
Sure. So I am now a full-time life coach for leaders, and I help leaders work less, make more, and design a life they love. Came from Kansas, started out as an IHOP waitress, and was like mid-manager at Boeing and Coke, and completely stressed out, and got really, really sick, and realized something had to change. And so I started like obsessively studying what makes some people happier than others, what makes some people more successful than others, and then what to do with all my autoimmune diseases, and ended up turning everything around and figured out for myself how I could actually say no and work less and keep getting promoted, and how I could have more time with my kids and be in the moment and lose the mom guilt. And so it was surprising to me when it first started actually working. But it did. I ended up in the C-suite before 40 and have luxurious amounts of time for the things that matter most. So that's now what I coach clients on, so that they can not have to give up on their dreams, but like enjoy their full life while doing it.
You have such an amazing story, and maybe we link to one of the podcasts that you sent me where you were a guest, just about your journey of, I mean, you literally had a near-death experience and how that totally changed the trajectory of how you thought about work and life and all of those things. And probably don't have time to go into it today, but it is, I mean, this sounds really cliche, but when I heard that, I was like, like it was extremely inspiring. I mean, like, damn, really. I mean, it's just an intense story. So we'll definitely link to that.
Thank you.
So let's jump right in. So one of the things that I think women struggle with, and it's not just for women, right? This happens with men and everyone in the workplace, but is this the ability to say no. And this applies in the workplace, this applies at home, but let's first kind of focus in on at work, where we feel like we're being asked to do something, we want to show up, we want to increase our performance and be viewed in a light of we're a team player, but then it has all of these negative side effects, if you will, and actually can sometimes hurt your performance. So what are your thoughts in this space? Like, take us down, like why we do this and what are some of the impacts?
Yeah, I love it. So let's talk first what you just mentioned about the impact of it. So I call it the tragedy of the high performer. So imagine that we all have a plate of work, right? So it's a nice little dinner plate. I've got some salmon and some rice and some broccoli on there. And I'm doing fine with my dinner plate. But Ed over here is not doing as great with his dinner plate. And so the boss comes over and says he can't handle all that food. So I'm going to take some of it off. And guess what? I got to figure out where to put it. So I'm going to Alicia's been doing great with her salmon dinner plate. So I'm going to go ahead and add some onto her. And at first you're like, yes, they trust me. They think I've been doing a good job. I'm excited to show them what I can do. Give me Ed's stuff. That's great. Mm-hmm. And then over time, it keeps happening and it keeps happening. And I have this like funny visual for it where it's this server with like 17 different platters that he's trying to hold up. And then what happens is you have so much work that you're dying. You're no longer seen as a high performer because you're like barely like struggling to get by. And the boss says, there's no way I can let Alicia take the promotion. I don't know where I'd be without her. I can't let her go to something else. I'd have to hire 3 people. Right? And so that's what I call the tragedy of the high performer. And it comes from both being given work and volunteering for too much work to the point that we are no longer excelling at what our primary role is. So I think that's just really good background, because what it reminds us of is when we say yes, what like negative can actually happen. And then, of course, being from Coke, I use a lot of economic terms, but the opportunity cost of it is the other side that we want to look at. And so like one of my big aha moments was sitting in a conference room where we were doing those, like, have you guys ever been in a war room style thing when you have a big project? So we had been staying until 9 to 11 o'clock at night every night. It's when I worked at Boeing. And so we had like, we'd go in at 6, like, so the
Mm.
really long days. And one guy just kept leaving every day early. And when I say early, he would leave at like 4. And I'm like, that's like lunch for us. Or like, what are you doing? And one day he told me, he's like, I asked him, like, where are you going? Like, you don't volunteer for anything. You always say you have to leave. And he's like, oh, I've got my kids' basketball games. And he's like, I told him I'd never miss one. And it just like super hit me on the way home because this entire time I had labeled him, and I did this a lot of judgment when I was younger, but I labeled him as like lazy and didn't have the work ethic that I had and da 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 da. And I realized in that moment, every time he said no to work, he was saying yes to his family. And every time I said yes to work, I was saying no to my family. Right. So I think between the tragedy of the high performer and then knowing the opportunity costs, that every time you say yes to something at work, you're saying no to something else. And it could just be another project. Because I remember, like, don't worry, I got this. I'll do it from 11 to midnight. And I didn't understand either, like, law of diminishing return, that if I would have spent
Yeah.
that thought time on my key projects, I would have advanced them more too. Right. So there's a million reasons why we don't want to do it. And there's lots of science behind it. But then it's like good to figure out why we're doing it in the first place. So a
Yes.
lot of that comes from how we were raised. And so I'd love to like have you guys jump in on this, but I'll give a little brief example of like for me, I was raised with like work ethic was everything. And so I started
Mhm.
working full time when I was still in high school. And so I would go to school in the mornings and then I'd go to work full time in the afternoons and evenings. And then I'd get off and I'd go to the gym and I'd do my homework and I'd do it all again. And we worked on Saturdays. My dad, in his big, loud New York voice, is like, well, what the hell are you doing on Sunday? Why don't you get a part time job? And he's like deathly serious, right? And so that is what I grew up with. And he made it from the bottom to the top and did all these things. And it was because of his work ethic. So all I could do is show up and show how I could outwork anyone. And I
Yep.
thought it was such a good skill until it almost killed me.
Yeah.
So that's
I
where it came from for me. Where do you guys think it came from for like the yeses?
I would say something similar for me. In fact, I just had dinner with my dad. We were both kind of talking about work and how crazy it is. And he was, you know, maybe venting a little bit about some things. And he was like, that's, we're hard workers. We have work ethic. And like, we specifically talk like this is how we were raised. And I agree with him. But like, there's a certain point where you're just like, to what you were talking about, you're saying yes to work and no to probably things that matter more. And it was just yeah, I had a job when I was 14. Went same similar story. Worked during the day, or went to school during the day. Right after school, headed to work. Came home, did homework. Maybe got to bed by midnight. Got up and like did it all again.
Right. For
Um,
years, right? Like,
yeah, and it's just kind of ingrained in you, like you have this work ethic and you have to show up a certain way. I think the other flip side too is there's this perception of you don't want to seem like you're not leaning in or not wanting to help out the team.
yeah.
So there was this group message asking for some help. There's several people in it. And I sat there and I'm like, I'm not going to say anything. Like someone else can take this one. I'm intentionally saying no to this thing, and no one responded. No one responded. No one responded. We're like halfway through the day and I'm like, I'll help you. And I just like couldn't, because I shouldn't feel this way, but I felt
Mhm.
extremely guilty. I know I can help this person. It's not going to take too much more of my time, but it's that mental load. It's the cognitive load too. Like,
Mhm.
I got a task switch with this. That's a very
Yeah.
long-winded answer, but it's just so prevalent in everyday things. And this mentality starts so super young.
Mhm.
So I don't know what about you, Alicia?
So very similar. Like in order to get my first car, my parents were not going to purchase it for me. So I started working at 15 because I had to save to get my first car. And then once I turned 16, I was 100% responsible for my insurance, any of the stuff I wanted to do. So that just compounds the need to have to work more to pay for the things that you are having, especially like as a 16-year-old, like paying for like these things independently. So I worked at a grocery store and I worked on the weekends, just like you. I had soccer practice from like 3 to 5. Then I would run to the grocery store, work from then go home and and go to bed super late, starting really bad sleep habits then because of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the same thing has perpetuated. And now I have children and I have a 14-year-old and he's like, I want to get a job. And I'm like, no. And because I'm like, once you start, it does not stop.
Mm-hmm.
Like you are essentially working until you decide that you are affluent enough that you can retire, or until you
Mm-hmm.
retire because of age. I understand you want to buy these things, but you really do not need the name brand hoodie that you're looking to go work for. I have a very similar thing. I was working every day on the weekends. My dad is a farmer, so they do not take a day off. And so there is just constantly work, work, work. And I get that there's always work to be done. But on Wednesday of this week, I was just sat out by a fire pit by myself, and it was really great.
Love it. Yeah, so I go through with clients and try to understand like what their underlying is. And sometimes it is like the work ethic that goes with the family. Sometimes it's I want to be helpful. And that I was raised that especially women, right, we are supposed to be communal and helpful. And when we say no, then it means we're a complete asshole, right? Not that we're like just prioritizing. Sometimes, and this one gets me with my ego, is I don't want to look weak. I don't look like I can't handle it. I can handle anything you can handle. And so that sometimes can get us. What else do I have here? Like, wanting people to like us. So there's different personality types, and some of them want people to like the work that we do and to think that we're good and smart. And some people want us to like us as a human. And people who that's their underlying motivation, it's really hard to say no because they worry that that's going to be taken away from them. And the one no. And I teach them that you'll survive it and the relationship will survive it, right?
Yeah.
That's usually a big part of why as well. And a lot of these things can be really positive until we overuse them. And so it's about how do we use them to our advantage and be intentional with our life and not let our autopilot kind of settings dictate how we react, but instead just like, okay, let's use some logic in this scenario. I'm still going to have a good work ethic if I say no to this one thing.
Yeah.
But within this moment, what is better for the life that I want? And so we talk a lot about lifestyle and we really define that going in, like what extraordinary looks like. So then that can be your North Star when making some of these decisions.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
How would you coach and support someone pretty good at saying no to things? Because if it doesn't attach to a metric or some type of value add at the end of the year, then I don't know why we would put energy towards it. So I'm always kind of like, I don't really see the point of this. And I'm further enough probably that I can kind of like see that can connect those dots. But let's say you're working for someone, they say, hey, this is your new task. And they don't have the option to say no. Like it just gets assigned to them. So how do you kind of help them or coach them to navigate like just someone pushing and they don't even given the opportunity to say no?
Yeah, great question. So one of the first things we're going to do is like get before that question ever even happens. And I work with leaders on how to own your work and how to communicate your work. And so that's a big piece that that executives do and strategic leaders do, but you've got to build that skill set earlier so that you can inform your leaders. So what I mean by this is whether it's here's my business in a few slides. Here's what we do and who we serve. Here is our plan for the year. And then here is where we are with those initiatives, whatever makes sense for your business on what you're going to put there, right? Here's my roadmap. So we said, and we agreed, me and you, supervisor, that these were the top 3 things that me and my team are going to work on this year. Now, when I'm meeting with you on a very regular basis, I'm showing you our roadmap. And remember, we're on step 2B. So what we've got to really focus on this month is this, this, and this. And we're green light, we're doing good on it, but we got to stay focused. You have to be able to talk about your business in that way because then leaders know what you're working on. When they're going to add something to your plate, they are going to be weighing in their own head, do I want to pull them away from this or not? And it just lets them know that you're intentionally choosing the strategic things, to your point, Alicia, that are driving the organization forward and that you have a plan. It also helps them from just getting worried you don't have a plan and adding and like coming into your business and like throwing little curveballs or asking questions that make you go on rabbit trails that aren't even like helpful. So it takes away some of the busy work and then it gives you a tool. And so let's say that you have all of those things and the boss still says, need you to do this. Well, then you can come back and you can say, got it. So here's what we were doing for the month. If we add this to the plate, is there one of these that you think is less important that we should pause for now? Or that'll push this out 4 weeks. Are you good with that if we take this on? And let them know what the exchange is. Because a lot of times the boss doesn't know where you're actually spending your time or what you're getting from other stakeholders in the business, because we usually get our work from more than one place. And so being able to articulate that is a great starting place to protect yourself from asks and to be able to go back and ask for prioritization, but you still get some shit afterwards, right? That's not like, it doesn't block it all, but it takes a good 70% of it and squashes it down and helps people think of you as a strategic leader instead of like the action gal that can get everything done quickly and is so happy to answer my calls.
Right. Less transactional. I think that's huge because, and I've used that before too, and I've seen it work. It's like, it can't always be a +1. It can't always be an ad. I'm happy to do this. I was reading a few articles around you can say no by saying yes. And it was basically making the point of, yes, I can do this, exactly what you were talking about. But what are some of these other things that I'm going to have to say no to? And it also puts a lot of onus back on the leader, your manager, to say, okay, here's what we're going to prioritize. We're having this conversation. We're in agreement. So if something comes back like, why didn't we make progress here? Well, we can specifically go back and point to this conversation that we made an intentional decision around priority. And this is the route we decided to take. So those conversations are definitely needed.
Yeah, and on those, like I always had one pager that said what our initiatives were for the year, and then it had different columns, and one of the columns is what we're not going to do this year, and it was those agreed upon statements of what we will not work on this year, and then it had a deprioritized list, which means like, and you can name it whatever you want, but this was if we get some extra time, if anything ever slows down, then we'll move to this list. But it is only if there's extra time. And then these things we committed to that we are not doing this year. And they could be good ideas. And that's what I think is really important for us to realize. I used to have a sticky note on my desk that said, we will always have more good ideas than the capacity to execute. Right. And so just remembering it's not about saying no to bad stuff. That's easy. It's about saying no to good stuff that takes you off track from what's truly most important. Yeah. So I love that. What are we going to stop doing? What are we not going to do? And that has to be a regular conversation. So one thing I suggest to leaders, make sure in your meetings and in your time, you're giving equal airtime to not only what you're doing, but what you're not doing.
I love that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Do we want to move into executive presence?
I'll give you just a couple of quick tips real quick before we do.
Sure. Yes.
Okay. So stop volunteering. The first thing we do every month is we say no to everything for the next 30 days and stop raising your hand, because the first thing we need to do is really get better control over your calendar. What I typically, this is like broad estimate, but we probably cut down 40% of the workload of the leaders I work with. So we take 40% of the things off your calendar, and then we may add in some that you're not doing that are a little bit more strategic. And a lot of times it's relationship work that's not there. So a lot of high performers keep their head down and get their work done, but they don't spend as much time on the relationships, and you'll need those. I was listening to one of your previous podcasts. I don't know if I did them in order, so I don't know if it's the last one or not, but you talked about the sponsoring and the board of directors. So for the sponsorship, one thing that I think is really important that we miss is that the hiring manager for a role you want in the future needs to know who you are. So it's not just about your performance. It's also about your image and your exposure. There's like a PI acronym for that. The performance, image, and exposure. And we spend so much time on doing a good job, but then you don't have the image and exposure with the leaders actually making the decisions. So then John gets promoted and you're like, I didn't even know that role was available. You don't want the hiring manager to meet you in that interview process. You want them to know who you are and what capabilities you are. One of you, Tracy, it might've been you, mentioned that for the skip levels, like you want them to know who you are too, to think about opportunities, even for projects, like not even for whole roles, but just to think, hey, I bet their team has the capability to help with this. Let them see who you are and what you're made of ahead of time. And so a lot of times what we're doing is let's take off all this busy work, all this housework, all this low level work so that you can excel at the things that really drive the organization forward. And so you have time to intentionally and proactively build relationships. And then my third tier, I do results, relationships, and rituals. And rituals are the things that give us energy and help us, perform at the highest level, and self-care and all of that. So I think that's really important to know, to stop volunteering and give yourself time for those relationships. And then, have you guys talked about office housework before?
No.
Okay. I heard a tip somewhere where one of you said, like, oh, it was like for the meeting hacks, you said to rotate who takes the notes.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So there's a lot of science behind how much of the office housework is given to women versus men. And office housework is any administrative task that is not aligned, as Alicia said earlier, to the metrics of something driving the business forward. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so this could be taking meeting notes, planning, like ordering lunch for everybody, planning conferences, doing charity work, like whatever it is. It could even be some like, all the ERGs, the business resource groups, employee resource groups, primarily led by minorities and women. And so I think those are truly valuable. I'm not saying that at all, but just look at the disproportional amount of time that you're taking out of your role for things that aren't those initiatives that get you promoted. And so being aware of that's really important. And I'd be in big, and like you said, Alicia, the higher up you go, the more you can kind of say and do and whatever. And let's use that to help people. But I remember being in big rooms and saying, I need someone to take notes and I need it not to be a woman.
Yep.
And like, once you have the relationships established and like, you can do it with a smile and you can do it with humor, like, let's call out those inequities and help change things for people in the future. So office housework is huge to be aware of and to not volunteer for. And Tracy, like, you gave a good example about how like you tried not to jump in. I would, as your coach, ask you to go 2 days before jumping in instead of 4 hours, right? Because there may be a time when it does make sense, but how do you push yourself past your comfort zone? And so many times people do end up stepping up eventually, but they think at first that you're going to do it. So one of my clients said that she used to drop everything she was doing to help this other peer group. And she found out later that that woman said, hey, you can always call Shayla. She like isn't doing anything. She always responds so quick. So she was literally stressing herself out, dropping everything to try to rapidly respond as a good internal customer. And the way they perceived that was she has nothing on her plate, she's never busy, and she's so easy to get stuff from.
Wow.
Right? So we have to be careful because our level of responsiveness gives people the ease of getting what they need easily out of us. And sometimes they won't even self-service or try because it's just so easy to go over to Tracy.
Yeah, that's a really good point on like the self-serve. Like, people get into a habit of their go-to person, like you just talked about, and reaching out to them directly before they even remotely try to find an answer on their own. I think that happens a lot. And one other thing that you said that kind of made me think about that scenario where I waited 4 hours and maybe I should have waited 2 days is one thing I could have done too is when I was feeling the anxiousness of no one responding, maybe in that group chat, I could have said, mention someone, can you take this? I don't have capacity right now. Mm-hmm. And that way we're still like making some progress and moving forward.
So let's reword that. So this is one of the quick tips too. Explain what you're working on and who you are helping, but someone else it could be a great opportunity for. So let me explain what I mean by that. So in this situation, what you could have said is not, at Tom, can you help with this? I don't have capacity. At Tom, can you help with this? I know you specialize in it. At Tom, can you help with this? I know you've been connected with Bob on this. Like, give a reason why it makes sense for it to be Tom, not that you don't have time or don't want to do it either. Mm-hmm. So on projects, if your boss comes to you for the question earlier, if your boss comes to you and says, can you do this? Then this is, are you guys familiar with Lean In? Mm-hmm. So Sheryl Sandberg, the former CEO of Facebook, started a group called Lean In, and you can start your own Lean In circle anywhere. So we started it at Molax. We started with like 8 women, and we ended up having 1,600 women and men in the US, Mexico, and Europe. And it's like a monthly meeting basically where you talk about ways that you can create more inclusive environments and some like real issues that happen. And they have studied a lot of the science behind it. And their best way to say how a woman, with all of the biases that we have for how women should act, can best respond when saying no. Okay. And it goes something like this, thank you so much for thinking of me for that opportunity. I'm actually currently helping Tracy with this initiative that's, tied to our company thing. But I think it would be a great opportunity for Alicia because she's been wanting to build her skill set in this. And it's stupid, but if you say no and you just say like, I don't have capacity, then they're like, she's a jerk, not a team player, whatever. But if you say, I'm already helping someone because that's what I'm supposed to do as a woman, but I want to help somebody else and it'd be a great opportunity for this other person. We could help them. Right.
Yeah.
So it annoys the shit out of me that we have to do it and we can't just be like, no, I'm full. But it's good to think about, are there ways that we can do it that don't have the repercussions that maybe saying a different way? And so if I'm going to say it that way until I can keep moving up and keep spreading the message that it's okay to say no and that there is an inequality that we can work on. And okay, then maybe that's what we do as we start to change the world.
Alicia, did you have something to add?
I was just going to ask, like, this conversation is predominantly around work, but do you find that the same tips apply to people trying to clean up their personal obligations and volunteering for all the other things that are outside of work?
100%. So we talked earlier about like, we're not going to bring food, but so we start always by defining what good looks like for your unique life. And so we take the different roles in your life, and the role could be in your career and as a mother and as a friend and as an athlete or whatever your roles are. And we define what extraordinary looks like. Once we know that, that is your litmus test for whether you want to do something or not. So the example that I gave is I created what I wanted as a mother and how I wanted my children to be. So I said I wanted to have an intimate relationship with my children. I want them to be kind, courageous, and worldly. And so when I went back and said, okay, my church is having a parenting class, does that align with my vision? Well, loosely, and I guess this is where you could do the correlated versus, actually, what's the other word?
I don't know.
Like in data, if something is actually indicative of success happening or not, it's like the difference between if something's correlated or if it's,
I don't know. You're stumping me.
Somebody can help us. There's like 2 C words for it. Anyways, but whether something's directly attributable or related to it.
Yeah.
So anyways, so when I look at that, well, yeah, I want to be a good parent, but I said I want to intimately know my children and they're already at soccer once a week and dance once a week. And that would be one more night a week away from them. So that one probably doesn't fit for me, at least not at that moment in time. Mm-hmm. And so you have to get real specific on what your yes is and what you actually want. And then it's easier to let everything else fall out. But we practice losing mom guilt and losing shame. And we even practice how to like have healthy friendships where there's not, oh my God, she didn't text back. Like I can't keep up with these 80 strand like things that come from these group messages and I'm not going to try, right? But what we've got to do is be the example of how we can enter back in when we have time and capacity without any of that, ugh, where have you been? Or, oh my God, I've been so busy. Or like, no, let's just like enjoy the time we do have together. And so it's with everything. It's with friendships. It's with personal commitments. It's with everything. And with women, we talk not only about how to say no, but we talk about how to clear the clutter in your home, how to clear your schedule, and how to clear your mind. And the mind is so freeing.
Yeah.
So freeing.
There's so much that lives in there. Rent free for the most part.
Yeah. So that tool I mentioned earlier, it's like the 9 things you can stop doing. It has stuff both like at work and at home.
Oh, nice.
And including like kids' birthday parties and making those low key, but still memorable for them and that kind of thing too. So.
Nice.
This reminds me, so I have a friend and, we hang out every now and again and things like that. And there was a couple times where I would ask her to do something and it was with like a larger group and, hey, come on out. And she's like, no. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, that's fine. And it happened a few more times and we were finally caught up and we're having drinks and we were talking about this. And she was like, I hope you don't think I'm rude when I say no. I'm like, oh, no, it's like not a big deal. And she's like, I've just learned that I have to be in charge of my time. And if I don't really want to do something, I have to be in charge of that. And it's nothing against you. It's not that I don't enjoy hanging out with you or the group or whatever, but it would be things like, maybe going to a concert that she wasn't like super into the music. She's like, why would I like go? I don't even really like that music. And then I'm investing this time. She's just like, I just don't really want to go. I think I want to just stay home and hang out. And so I'm like, that has always rung so true. And it's something that I still struggle with is this feeling of Like you want to show up for the group, like, oh, I haven't seen my friends in a long time, or man, I haven't done anything 2 weekends in a row. Like I really need to get out of the house and go do something. But it's actually like, it's okay. Like the weird guilt of saying no because you don't want to do that specific activity because you genuinely just don't like it. Like
Yeah.
it's I always use that example and I tell her all the time, I'm like, I think about that actually a lot. Like
Well, it's a
that you
perfect example, and we can be a role model for our friends to let them feel good about saying no more too,
right.
right? So I
Right.
talk about like you don't have to do something just because the time is not blocked on your calendar. Like we feel this guilt if we don't have an excuse because oh, sorry, I can't. I have my kid's soccer game. That feels easier than sorry, I can't because I don't want to.
Right. Right.
Like, and so one of the things we talk about is like, you don't have to explain why either. And you should have time in your calendar for nothing.
Yep.
And so the other sticky note that I have is if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. And so that's just a good litmus test too. Like, is going to this concert with my friends a hell yes? Or is it like, I'd like to see them, but, and then the other question my husband asked that I love is, will doing this add more stress? And what's the easiest way? And so I ask those questions to myself now too. And I'm like, I would like to do this, right? Like there was like a golf tournament. I have a new girlfriend. We were going to learn how to golf together. And I was like, I would like to do this, but would doing this add more stress? And if I look at my comprehensive week, then I'm going to lose any downtime that I had the whole week. And even though it would be fun, then I'll be running like this. And then I'll be closer to being stressed and snappy and all of those things. Right. So that goes to the tip on like, no is a complete sentence. And my 12-year-old is a mommy helper / babysitter. And she said, hey, mom, she asked me to babysit on Sunday and I don't want to. Can I tell her it's because like you're just getting back and want to spend time with me? And I was like, you don't have to tell her anything. I said, you can just say I'm not available this Sunday, but please think of me in the future.
Yeah.
She doesn't need to know why or what you're doing. You can absolutely say no because you don't want to. And so it's funny that it like showed up at 12 where she already felt the guilt on like having to justify why she didn't want to do anything.
Yeah.
And do not have to justify why you don't want to do anything. And don't do a bunch of stuff that's mid, as the kids would say. Right?
I don't even know what that means.
Mediocre. It's like, meh.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's so mid.
Yeah. So mid. So yeah, if you like your friends, but you don't like the concert, then like, don't go. Like what are your alternatives? Right? What are you saying no to? And you could be saying no to curling up on the couch and reading a book or watching your favorite show or going for a walk or whatever. Like make sure you know what your alternatives are in your mind though, and think through those. So my final tip on saying no is give yourself 24 hours. Don't ever feel like you have to decide on the spot. And that's at work and at home, right? So I've got this new project. Great. Do you mind if I take 24 hours? Let me just look through and refresh myself on mine and the team's priorities and our schedule coming up this month. And I can get back with you tomorrow.
Sure.
Same thing at home. You want to go to this concert? I can let you know by Thursday.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that pressure in the moment, we're so much more likely to do our default response.
Yeah. I feel like I'm going to speak more for like myself, but I also think I recognize this in a lot of my female friends. Like the older we get, the more comfortable we are with saying no. But when you're younger, you have that stronger pressure. So like we need to teach this like saying no earlier in the process. But I have friends that be like, hey, do you want to meet up for happy hour today? And I'm like, not really. They're like, oh, what do you got going on? I'm like, I'm just going to play a video game by myself. I just don't want to go. But you don't get to that place of comfort, I feel like, until you get really confident, like in who you are as like a person, and just being like, nah, I don't. That's just not my jam. I don't want to go to that. People invite me to parties, and I'm like, that does not sound like appealing to me at all.
Yeah, but it's like I used to have FOMO too, and I think that's part of it, like fear of missing out, and that works in home and the workplace. And the workplace, it used to be like, I can't say no to this project. It's the only time they're ever going to ask me. It's my only chance to show them what I'm made of, so I can become an executive. I can't say no. They'll think I'm a quitter and I'll never have an opportunity again. Same thing happens with friend groups. Oh my God, but I really wanted to start hanging out with this person. And if I say no now, what if she never invites me again? It'll be okay. You'll have more opportunities. I promise you.
For sure. All right, cool. So those are some great pro tips. I love it.
One thing that One thing that you said that kind of I think transitions into the next topic around executive presence is even having the confidence to say no to executives. And
Mm-hmm.
I was curious your thought on, do you feel like executives or the C-suite or these like senior leaders probably have more, I don't want to say respect, I don't know what the word would be, but more respect for people that are intentionally prioritizing and are not a yes man or a yes woman? Like, is that a way that females can show up more by not being looked at as that the yes person and less
Yeah.
transactional?
Yeah. So we talked earlier about how to be able to talk about your business. And that
Mm-hmm.
is really important in these conversations, is to be able to say, I know my business, I know what my priorities are, and I'm focused on them. And so I don't think it's as much as I want to hear a no. So I'll
Right.
talk a little bit about like two things when you're working with executives that you can think about is ego and ease. And so when I say ego, we all have egos. It's not a bad thing, but let's realize that the people we're working with are humans. And so when we say give feedback, like let's say that there's a project and we think that it sucks. And we are like, why are we wasting money and time on this? And either I have a better way or we just shouldn't be doing it or whatever. Like there are ways to say that and ways to not say that. And so sometimes I think that people go from I'm not saying anything at all to I'm ready, I'm going to be brave and I'm going to do it. And it
Mm-hmm.
almost goes like the pendulum swings all the way to the other side. And then they're kind of like coarse and brass. Well, you said you wanted feedback. You said you wanted to hear from people. I thought you wanted the truth. Right. And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like there is some middle ground in between. And so I think it helps when you think about as a human, they have an ego, they have incentives, they have fears. And
Mm-hmm.
so is the way that you're presenting this information going to come across condescending or judgmental? Is it going to say that the decisions that they've made in the past are bad or wrong? And so, like, just keeping that in mind and starting instead with your intent and explaining that your intent is to help the organization move forward. The intent is to help with this project or this whatever, like, actually stating your intent and then talking about the issue and asking it more inquisitive. I'm wondering if, have you thought about, I noticed this in this meeting. Has this came up for in the past? Has this came up before? Right. And so it's not, the shit's not going to work because, and I know we don't like cuss when we speak, but we speak with that same
Mm-hmm.
like intensity. And I
Right.
think that it's important that we think about the how and think about your baby's not the prettiest. You know how everybody thinks their baby's the prettiest no matter what? This used to kill me. I worked in HR for a long, long time and everybody thought like whatever they were working on was the most important. I'm like, but there's like a whole business here, like whole business. And so I think understanding that relativeness too, that if you're talking to the CEO or, an executive about something, they have a lot of things on their plate.
Mm-hmm.
And so understanding how it fits in for them. And the second part I always say is ego and ease. So because they have so much going on in their world, it doesn't hurt them to have some things be easy. And so I think we see this sometimes, especially like younger Shayla was very judgmental, is they just want to take the easy way out. They're not willing to put in the work, or they don't want to hear real feedback because they just want to hear yes, yes, women and yes, men and da da da.
Mm-hmm.
No, but like sometimes when you have a lot going on, it's really nice to have some people that you can call and you trust and that are easy to work with. And so,
Yeah.
depending on how we give our feedback, we can come across as, really smart, got a lot of good ideas, but damn, it's always like draining to work with her, right? She's always challenging and she's got so like always questioning. I'm like, sometimes can we just let this one be easy? And it's
Mm-hmm.
usually from us that are like passionate and excited and feel like you said you wanted somebody to talk to you. And I know you get less feedback at the top, and I'm willing to share like all the problems and everything going on with everyone. But they're just like, every meeting I leave like, right? And I was totally the one that
So
drained
real.
people. And it was like all out of goodness because I cared so much, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But I think it's really important for us to just realize like they're humans, there's ease and ego involved, there's incentives and fears, there's other projects. So like how do you portray it where you're still telling them the truth in an authentic to you way? I'm not trying to tell people to turn their voices off, right? But we don't want to think about what it is that we want to say. What are we thinking? What are we feeling? We want to say, how can they best receive this and how can we get to the best solution? Those words are often very different than what we're thinking. We're thinking this project sucks and Bob's never going to get it done. It's going to be 50 million over budget.
Yep.
And nobody is saying this, and everybody should be saying this. And it's an SAP project and it's not going to get done on time. We're going to be 2 years past. I loved it. Like there was projects like that and I would say that and they'd be like, how do you know? I'm like, have you ever seen one that actually on schedule? Like, what am I missing? Right. So, but like what I am thinking and what I am feeling is not what I need to say.
Mm-hmm.
So if this project were to run long, do we know how we'd resource it? Have we thought about, I actually think we're going to have some team members leave. And I don't know which ones, but there's a lot of talk. So what do you think our best options would be if that does happen and the team gets cut in half? Like, would we outsource? Are you thinking it's internal? Not everyone's leaving because they hate this shit. Like, and then a curious good leader will say, well, why do we think that is? Why are they leaving? You know? And so, and I'm just talking off the cuff on some examples, but just the idea of slowing down and thinking through your message and your approach, but still being able to bring your authentic voice while doing it.
Yeah. So Shayla and I both came from Coke Industries, so she's going to be familiar with what I'm going to talk about. But at Coke, there's this thing called a DMF, the decision-making framework. And it's this process of going through and looking at, you know, what is your recommendation? What are the alternatives? What are your risks and mitigation plans? You do an economic analysis, and the output of that process can be a document, it can be an email, but it's basically just stating, this is how I'm recommending we move forward. And these are all the things I did to look at everything else as part of the alternatives. But one time I did went through that process and it was for a major transformation. And one of the risks that I called out was employee burnout, and we had some serious retention risks. We were going through on this giant project. People were literally working, 16, 18-hour days and on the weekends. And no one would say this to senior leadership. Everyone knew that everyone was just working nonstop. But it's reminded me, Shayla, what you're saying, like what you want to say is, holy shit, everyone hates this place. The transformation is like, we all get it, we're bought in, but we are working way too much and it's not sustainable. But instead it's like, hey, here's what I'm hearing from employees. These are some of the things that we can do. If we continue at this pace or we don't get additional resources, these are the risks.
Yeah.
And I think kind of laying it out there, you're showing that you're willing to partner and you're coming up with solutions to try to help resolve the issue, but you're not just like, bro, we can't keep doing this.
Yeah. And you're also showing that you don't get fazed by even stressful situations. So you mentioned earlier, like by saying no, do you get their respect? By being calm, you can, for sure. Because they've been down this road before and they've handled all of these things and they've handled a lot worse. And so when you bring it and it's the biggest thing you've handled in your life so far, in your career life so far, just like with our kids, when they freak out over what we think is smaller stuff, it's the biggest thing they've dealt with so far. So if we want to present as to executives and seem like we're somebody who can take on more, then probably the less dramatic and the more calm and factual we are, the more it looks like they can handle a lot. They handled that without freaking out. I could probably give them more, higher level scope or wider scope or whatever.
More strategic. It's funny that you bring up like this calming thing, because one of the best pieces of advice I've ever received, shout out to Kevin Spires, I used to report to him.
I know Kevin.
Yeah, he's awesome. Was be the calming force.
Yeah.
And it was because I was in a meeting. I don't know if I've ever told this story, so I'm gonna have to be a little bit careful. I'm not going to use names or partners, but I was in this big meeting. It's the digital transformation thing. And, we were going over risk and mitigation plans because why we were off track. And I had a partner, didn't work for the same company, and they shushed me on a call. They literally like, shh, shh. Like I was trying to talk and they were shushing me. They're like, Tracy, stop, shh, shh. And I was like, I saw red. I was just so infuriated at, like, just with the disrespect and just all of the things. My voice got elevated. I started to get like super passionate. I ended up having to turn off my video and I just went on mute because there was nothing good that I was going to say at that point. And we got off the call, and Kevin called me, and he was like, wow, that was really disrespectful what that person did. And first he validated me,
Yeah.
and then he said, in these scenarios, we have to be the calming force. What would have given you more authority is if you remained calm, you remained like very pragmatic and around, how he was treating you and how to move forward. That message goes a lot further than blah, like, don't shush me, blah. But in the moment, you're just like,
It's,
I
yeah.
was completely wowed that was even happening. But I will never forget that piece of advice is just be the calming force, be that sense of authority in the room, and you're gonna get shit done, way more than being the, all of those things.
Yeah.
That is the best example ever. It really is, because it's like we have a lot of things that happen that get stressful or like can really, what do you say when somebody can push your buttons, right? There are things that will trigger us. And so one of the things that I work on myself and with my clients is how can we make it like funny and lighter when we would traditionally get triggered? So in that situation, can you say, so that shit just happened? Like, and make it almost like, because that will totally change your internal energy around it. And so it is
Yeah.
our thoughts, because our thoughts will be like, I cannot believe he just did that. Who the hell does he think he is? And doesn't he know I'm good at my job and I know what I'm doing? And it's so disrespectful. And is it because I'm a woman? And like, we can do all that. Or we can be like, that shit just happened. I can't believe it. Right. And so then what I also work on with clients is sometimes they're like, okay, so when I'm pissed, and I have a client that's like been working on this with some peers, and some of her peers are like literally the rudest women ever. And they'll like whisper to each other during a meeting about her. They'll like text and like talk shit during the meeting, and then even be like, that was funny, Alicia, knowing what they're doing, right? Totally immature, but grown women, and everyone lets it happen. And so we're like, yeah, they're just not going to be on your radar, right? Like, we're just not going to, like, we're going to be like, this is completely unacceptable. But when something actually happens, I'm not telling you to not address it, because she thought she had to either go from, I've been not saying anything, so I need to take the high road and I need to be professional, or I'm going to go fucking off because, sorry, I'm sorry, or I'm going to go off.
Oh, we can say fuck
You
on
just
this
can't use,
podcast.
you just can't use any of it in a video is what I hear, right? Like, I feel like,
FOMO.
have I went through any paragraph without adding in something? I don't know. Anyways, so it's either like I'm going to let it go so I can stay professional, or I'm going to go to the complete other side of it and go off on somebody. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. There's so many options in between. Let's talk about
Mhm.
those. I always want you to stand up for yourself. And you can decide in what situation does it matter to you enough to do it or not, right?
Yeah.
But if it matters to you, absolutely want you to say that that's not appropriate, and I expect that to not happen again.
Mhm.
And so we can role play through what that language is and what that conversation is. But it's like in that situation, I would say, oh my God, to your situation, Tracy, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. Like, that shit's crazy. Like, it's crazy that somebody would act that way in a professional environment is what I'm thinking. But then
Yeah.
afterwards, I'm still going to say, Bob, yeah, you're never going to shush me again in a meeting.
Yeah.
That's not respectful at all. That's not how we do business. And it's definitely not how we're going to do business with our vendors. And I just want you to know that when you did that, it came across really condescending. And that's not how we're going to interact in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to like hold all your power and have the conversation and say, this is the boundary
Yeah.
and this is not going to happen again. But how can we do that while not letting it take our energy?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so powerful. So powerful. And then like it literally has changed my life, because if you think about it, there's little things throughout your whole day. There's traffic that can take your energy and get you on that. There's guys being rude in the office, or girls being rude in the office that can do that. There's so many things, and then they stack.
Yeah.
But if we can flip our thought about it immediately and be like, that's wild that people act that way, but I don't care. So, and then move on. Then we get to preserve all of our energy, right?
Yeah. Question for you. So, one thing that I think gets maybe not overlooked, it's something that's there but not talked about as much, is the physical presence, physical image of being, having that executive presence, like looking a certain way, how you dress, are you wearing makeup today? How do you think that plays? I mean, specifically for women, we can go into maybe talk a little bit for men and the differences there, but how do you think that dynamic works for women, and the need to, always be done up or have a full face of makeup or, you
Yeah.
know, perfect hair in the blazer, you know, like
Yeah.
what are some of those things that you notice?
How does it play and how should it play are two very different things.
Yeah.
Um, so how does it play? We talked earlier about the PI acronym. So it's performance, image, and exposure. Your
Yeah.
image matters. And sometimes we don't get a lot of time with somebody. And so it really is first impressions. It's only
Mhm.
been in one meeting with them ever, but they looked the part, they acted the part, even if you said very few words, right? And so I don't think we can underestimate how much it's used. People are visual creatures, especially men too. And so it also, I think, can show up immediately as, are you somebody that has themselves put together, or are you like the frantic hot mess mom? So I talk about my journey as going from the middle manager hot mess mom to the cool, calm executive. And a big part of that was slowing down, not coming in frantic and rushed and like Kramer at the last minute into a meeting. And then we've talked a little bit too about how like you have that energy where you want to speak and prove yourself. And so you're like antsy, you're talking a lot and jumping in.
Yeah.
You just look like a hot mess. And so imagine what that would look like with my hair and my clothes and whatever.
Mhm.
So that's the like running last minute, not having anything planned, not, I mean, it's not doing your hair or not whatever. And I'm not saying that women have to be like fully feminine, but think about what does your put together look like? And are you doing that? And how can you simplify it? So even things like the capsule wardrobe, it's funny because a
Yeah.
lot of people, as they become more successful or more wealthy, actually have less and make less decisions. And that
Right.
there's a reason that's correlated. And so I find now that like I give myself enough time
Mhm.
and I have time to get ready and I have time to accessorize and I have time to say, do I feel good and confident in this?
Yeah.
Now I'll tell you, I went from Coke, I was leading mergers and acquisitions integration and during the pandemic. And so we went all on Zoom. And I used to joke with everyone that, oh my God, it's weird. Our analysts started wearing hoodies every day and they didn't become less smart.
Yeah.
It blew my mind. They were like still capable, even though they had a hoodie on. Right. And so I don't think that clothes make you who you are. And but there is a bridge between dress for the role that you want and
Yeah.
dress to impress and all of those things versus do whatever you want, because there are impressions. But what I would tell a client or coach is that how do you feel?
Mhm.
And do you feel put together? And do you feel professional? Because your energy will exude regardless of what you're
Right.
wearing. Like today, I'm wearing a t-shirt. Look, this is my summer Austin. I'm trying to figure out how to be professional in Austin. So I'm wearing the work shorts. Like you can't
Oh,
pull that up.
nice.
So
Yeah.
I'm
I know
trying
what
to
you're
figure this
talking
out
about.
because I went to this like networking event the other day and it was outside like they do in Austin. And it was like, 94 degrees and my little pants and loafers weren't working. Okay.
Like
So
coming out with giant sweat marks.
yeah,
And you're just like,
I'm like,
it is
I gotta
so
figure this shit
fucking
out.
hot here.
But it's all about like what makes you feel comfortable. Because
Right.
then I left Coke and went to be a chief people officer for a wine company in Santa Monica. I could not wear any of the clothes that I wore at Coke. And even at M&A, we started wearing like jeans with the blazer and the loafers. And that
Yeah.
was like, oh my God, what are they doing? Who are they thinking they can
Mhm.
wear jeans?
Yes.
And then you go to California and everyone is very, great business people, but they're wearing very casual clothes. So I think it's how do you feel and how can you
Mhm.
show up and feel put together? Alicia, what do you think?
So I appreciate what you're saying, and I recognize that it's valid on the image part, but I absolutely hate it.
Fair.
And here's why, because I feel like there is a disproportionate amount of pressure on women for the
100%.
image. It's like I did put a little bit of makeup on today, a little bit of blush, but for the most part, like I hate that like if I don't put on makeup, people are like, oh, you don't look, are you sick? You don't feel well. Like you don't look well today. And I'm like, no, it's actually just my normal skin. Like it's allowed to have various colors all over it. It's not meant to be uniform. Like it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it just drives me berserk that we have such a disproportionate amount of pressure on women to look a specific way than we hold men to. Because, like, men aren't showing up wearing makeup so that they look completely polished on the face, but we do that to women. Or they're not having to do something to make their eyes pop, like, or make their eyelashes show up. I'm like, why can't we just let women exist as literal women without them having to cake a bunch of stuff on their faces? And I'm saying this knowing that I'm a little bit guilty myself wearing makeup today, but there are multiple days at when I show up to meetings and I just don't put anything on because I'm like, I'm okay just being a human. I'm a female. Like, I don't need to do all these extra things because society wants me to, really.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like,
I completely agree. And that's where I started with how it is and how it should be are two different things.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I probably spoke more to how it currently is than how it should be. And
it's like, how do we balance of this showing up as our authentic selves, but still recognizing that in certain scenarios, right, wrong, or indifferent, there's this perspective of first impressions, and how do we manage that? I mean, I definitely don't have a good answer for it. I still struggle with it. And I was telling Alicia about this the other day. I was getting ready to have some pretty tough conversations that day. And I had on just like a green, it wasn't even a hoodie, it's like this sweater, but it was a little bit more casual. And my hair back in a clippy. So I looked a little bit more casual, but I was going to go have some pretty tough conversations. And I got I'll just say, I got some feedback from my husband. He was like, you look great. I love that. But just here's my perspective is if you're going into these conversations, I would be putting on your like boss bitch stuff. Like go in there, exude the confidence, feel super confident. And at first I was like, but why? Like I can exude those same things in my green little pullover. And because you mentioned this, like it's your energy, it's some of those things. But until society reconciles that you can do both of those things, you can act, you have this executive presence, this sense of authority, and be in a green pullover, versus you got to have the blazer on to have those tough conversations or to be in front of, senior leaders. There's this weird balance that we have to. And I ended up changing. And I'm glad I did, because I did feel a little bit more, sassy is not the right word, but just confident in myself. Like you brought this up, you wear different things to feel different things. You don't wear a blazer to the gym to go work out because of the setting and the environment. You don't, I guess I do wear workout clothes to work sometimes. I was going to say the flip side, but I'm like, ugh.
Yeah.
But so I think there is this weird double-edged sword and balance that the more we can show up as our authentic selves, not wearing makeup and being like, this is okay, and I still exude this executive presence or sense of authority, but I also can do it when I have a full face of makeup on and I'm, rocking this new sweet outfit that I got from Rent the Runway, right? Like it can be both. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
Yeah, for sure. We have a long ways to go in this space, and I think it'll take a long time. And I'm not a huge celebrity follower by any means. That's not really my jam. But I do think that they are on the cusp of setting trends downward, just because they have such strong influence and so forth. And I've noticed there's a lot of trends. Well, not a lot. I noticed a growing trend that of celebrities not putting makeup on. I was just reading an article about how Pam Anderson doesn't, kind of pulling back from way back in the day, is not wearing makeup. Alicia Keys is not wearing makeup and doing a lot of photo shoots just in their natural skin now. Yep. And I feel like that is going to be so helpful in like normalizing that skin doesn't have to look like perfect, like all the time. And I love that they're doing it, because it does take someone that has kind of like a broad following to make that difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think it's such a nuanced topic too, because I want us to be able to do whatever we want because we're humans and we should be able to. And then I also have a little bit of like, when you were telling your story, Tracy, and I don't know what those difficult conversations were, but it's also like sometimes reverence for the situation. So last night we went to my oldest stepkid's college graduation, and my girls were asking like, what do I wear? And I was like, well, you need to dress up. And then the kids were like, why? Well, and this was actually probably my stepson that was like, why? Because I never change out of t-shirt and shorts. And I said, because it's out of respect for this is a big deal for her. And it's a moment. So we're going to we show up out of respect a little bit dressed up. And it's interesting because I don't know if I believe that or if it's like an old thing that has been like,
yeah. Is it real?
Right? Because it's kind of like church, like you get dressed up for church and it's like, well, God's not there, like in a pew. Right. But like, I don't know, but I have this split, and maybe it's my my age and how much progressive thinking I have and how much old shit I have. I don't know. But I do kind of like the idea of reverence for some situations. And that's where I think about, like, I don't know what your conversations were, but I imagine, like, if I'm going to be laying somebody off, then I'm going to be more dressed up than casual because it's a big, serious thing. And I want to look like I take it seriously, right? And then I notice, like, I wear casual clothes a lot, and I don't wear makeup every day either. But when I have calls with clients, I literally will change my shirt before I get on with them. And it's like, I want them to know that I take our time seriously and that I'm a professional for them.
Right.
And so, like, that's weird if we're saying, like, but you can be you, and, like, I'm offering the same coaching, but am I, or does that help? And, like, I don't know.
Yeah. Exactly. It's the inner struggle. And so this is what Alicia and I, before you joined, I told her, I was like, we got to save this for the pod. We can't talk about this. Her and I don't, this is the first time we both worn a blazer on the podcast. So you were on first, and I noticed Alicia was wearing a blazer, and I was like, I'm wearing a blazer. We're both wearing a blazer. And I wasn't going to wear one. And I have it hanging up in my closet in my office for, like, when I feel like I need to add some professional. I'm like, oh, cool. I got this graphic tee. I'm going to throw on my blazer over it. And we were talking a little bit, like, I wonder, like, why do we think we did that? And the more we talk about this, like, reverence, showing that you're serious, showing up for the conversation, like, I wanted to show up for Shayla. I wanted to show up for the podcast. You exude kind of like this executive presence and sense of authority. Like, I want to show that I also, I appreciate you being here, like, all of those things. And so I just think it's funny that this is just a full circle kind of moment for me.
So I got a little secret though. I appreciate the showing up and, like, wanting to present your best self, but, like, I have, like, a little tank top on underneath here, and I was like, tank top is kind of a little chilly down here in my office, and I don't know that tank top is quite the professional look I was going for this morning. Tracy knows that I'm going out of town this weekend, so I was, like, trying to pick up stuff so the house is decent when I come back, that I don't have more things to do. And I happened to grab a rain jacket, this blazer, and something else, and I was like, whoop.
I love it. I love it.
It's really more just like a situation of, or, an after effect of just what was me walking around. But it was really funny that we both were wearing it today.
Well, I didn't wear one on purpose. Because when listening to your show, your casual and progressive would show that women can just be themselves. And so, like,
well, now you know,
but if you feel cool with it, you got a graphic tee with it. Keep it on. It looks bad. Like, I actually, when I got into, I got a little uniform, and I'm like, this is how I feel good. And it was like those min loafers, and, like, some of them were cool. And I'd wear skinny jeans were okay back then. I'd wear skinny jeans and a bodysuit with a blazer. Like, I felt good in it, so I liked it, right? But it is funny. So GM's CEO, female CEO, came out with a dress code policy. Have you heard of this?
No.
This was 5 years ago. Threw out all the old stuff that was like a 12-page document and made it 2 words. Dress appropriately.
Solid.
And, like, it's so true, because it's like, what's going on in your world? What's the occasion? Like, what makes sense? But it does take, people to be adults and think. And at the same time, I was an HR leader, and our head of HR sent out an announcement. I was so embarrassed. And it said it was like the new dress code. And I was like, it's like 2020. What are we doing with the dress code? Like, what is happening? And it was very formal. And then in it, it said, if you aren't sure if you're appropriate or not, you can go to your HR person and they can look at you and decide. Right?
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, I swear, if one of my leaders isn't, I'm gonna make this nicer, isn't courageous enough to have the conversation with their employee and sends them to me to look at, I will, like, go off.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, it is set. There's so much shit that's like, just have the conversation. Like, just speak to people. Like, you look kind of crazy today. We got customers coming in. What are you doing? like, just have the conversation. I hate it when people avoid difficult but necessary conversations, right?
We could talk for hours and hours and hours about that. Man, I'm gonna get fired up.
That can be we'll do a part 2 on difficult conversations. But I wanted to say one more thing on the dress stuff. So I do think that we have bias on what people look like. And I think that, there's a ton of different types of bias. And one of them is, like, affinity bias. How much are you like me? And so if we think about what a typical executive looks like in these giant companies that we've all worked for, it is typically a white male, 50 to 65, and they dress the same and act the same and have the same family makeup, and it's same economics and same religions and all these things, right? It's very, very typical. So what happens as humans is that we say, here's where I am, and you're allowed to be about this far apart. And for like the podcast, I'm using my fingers like an inch apart. That's as far away from me as you can be and still be acceptable in my mind, right? And so I have seen this play out for male executives that I've coached too, and I've seen myself have the bias. So we had one executive that moved back from California to Illinois and wore jeans and sneakers in the office. And I was like, what is he doing? And he still wore like a golf polo. And I was like, no one's going to take him seriously. He's never going to get to the next level because he's not wearing the dress code. Right?
Yeah.
And then he high-fived me. And I was like, what is happening? What is happening? And I love this leader. He has a great personality. People follow him more than I've seen them follow any other leader. He has amazing energy. He's got customers relations. He's got strategy. And I was like, the belt buckle. That's what's going to do it. That's what's going to keep you from being an executive. So stupid, right? So stupid. And I've worked with leaders that are scared to tell their CEO that they're getting divorced because then they're not in that little realm of what you're supposed to be as an executive. So when we take apart like how far away from that we already naturally are, and then we add more and more and more things that are further away, unrightfully so, it is harder.
Yep.
Wow.
And I have bias and I don't like it, but I do. And so I try to notice it.
Yeah.
But it's important that you at least acknowledge it. Like a lot of folks are not self-reflective or, self-critical enough to even acknowledge that exists. And it totally is that.
I had one against a beautiful young woman. She said something in an executive meeting and did one of those perfect transitions, where you want to make a point that's completely counter, but you don't want to make people defensive. And so she did one of those, yes. And to further on to that, have we ever thought about, and then said something the exact opposite that no one had thought about. And then everybody was thinking about it. And I was like, damn, she's good. And I remember being so surprised because she was so beautiful that I didn't expect her to be that smart and that capable. And I was like, fuck, Shayla. Like, this is like your whole life's work is on empowering women and wanting them and then you did this. You judged this way.
Yeah. Well, we all have them, right? That's part of the human experience. I think the biggest piece is knowing that you have it. And then what are you doing to constantly check yourself? Yeah. I mean, like you did in that moment, like I do it too. Yeah. I mean, it's, I don't know. It's interesting, but just to kind of like wrap this up, any parting thoughts on all right, you're female, you're starting to get more involved with senior leadership. What's the one big tip that you would give someone to better show up with that sense of authority? I won't even call it executive presence. Maybe it's just a sense of authority.
Slow down. You deserve to be in the room. Act as if you've been there. They want you there. You expect to be there. And when you know you're going to be there again, over and over and over again, you're no longer in a rush and frantic and trying to jump in and prove your worth. This isn't FOMO. You're going to be there again. This is where you belong. So sit back, relax, and try to improve the business decision. And don't worry about self-promotion as much. Just add value when it makes sense to add value.
Damn. Mic drop. That was good. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending your Friday morning with us. It's been so fun, and we definitely want to have you back again for that part 2 that we were talking about earlier. So appreciate it.
So fun. I love what you all are doing, and I love that there's nothing off limits on what you'll talk about. And I think that women and men need to hear that, and they'll learn a lot from you and know how to be human.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
And chat later.
All right.